Right, here we are. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today on this 126th anniversary of the fall in combat of José Martí. For me, José Martí is not just an individual who represents a single nation, but one whose thoughts and ideals transcend to all of humanity all across our world. While he may have been born in Cuba, his thoughts reside in all of us. The beauty of José Martí's work can perhaps be seen from a small English translation of one of his writings from 130 years ago, and it's still relevant. And I know I won't be able to do justice to narrating this translation, but I must attempt to do so to help set the stage for the wonderful remembrances that we are all going to be fortunate to hear from our friends here today. In 1891, José Martí wrote, "I have a white rose to tend, in July as in January. I give it to the true friend who offers their frank hand to me, and for the cruel one whose blows break the heart by which I live. Thistle nor thorn do I give, for them too I have a white rose." This poem for me is an embodiment of all that José Martí stood for, and what I truly believe is something that all of us must stand for. Stop looking at people as friends or enemies, but rather to see them all as the humans that we are, equal and therefore deserving of equality, solidarity, and a peaceful existence. It's so heartwarming that these thoughts are shared by not just a few, but so many people all across the world, many of whom have joined us here today to share with you their thoughts on José Martí and the ideals that he propounded. I thank the Embassy of the Republic of Cuba here in India, and especially the Ambassador, Oscar Martínez Cordovéz, and the Deputy Chief of Mission, Juan Carlos Marcos Sanchez, for helping us bring all of you together. To be joined by so many friends from across the world, from Canada to Ecuador, to Mexico, to Cuba, to France, to Africa, to America, to India, in spite of the time difference that separates all of us, it's heartening to know that these ideals bring us together. So without getting too nostalgic, if I may invite our first friend, Rosalía Arteaga, a woman who I have tremendous respect for and have had the fortune of interacting with on a few occasions by now. The way that she looks at our world, the way she is hopeful of our collective future, is one that gives me confidence that there are individuals who have dedicated their hearts and minds towards the best interest of humanity. She is also the first woman in Ecuador to hold the positions of the vice president and also president of Ecuador, and remains the only woman who has served as the president. She now runs the Fidal Foundation, which amongst its various other initiatives is helping pass on her hope for our world to our younger generations. Rosalia, it's wonderful to have you amongst us, and would you be so kind to start us off today?
Good morning or good evening. It depends where you are. I'm so happy to be here and say thank you to Ramit and his organization to think about my participation in this session, a special session to pay a tribute to an extraordinary man and Latin American man that is José Martí. And I want also to say hello to everybody, especially to the ambassador of Cuba in India and to the other personalities that are here. Well, since I remember when I studied at school and high school, the teachers mentioned José Martí, sometimes like a politician, sometimes like a writer, an author. Like a politician, he is well known to get the liberation of Cuba from the colony in Spain, from Spain, and to liberate the last territory, I said, from this period of colonization that some of the principal European potentials at that time made in Latin America, colonial time, where the relations between Cuba and Ecuador had been in some kind of different periods, sometime very good relations, sometime not so good because of political situation, but never it was discussed, the figure of José Martí. He's always present in our tradition and in our essence, being like part of this good inheritance that we have for the humanity. And I'm so happy that in India and in other parts of the world, people is thinking about the legacy of José Martí. He was a fighter for the revolution, for the freedom of Cuba. He spent some years in the United States. He was a believer of a Republican, a democratic Republican. I always remember when I visit, because I visit several times Cuba, one of the times that I was, after being Minister of Education, I received a gift, and it was the complete set of books, the total books of José Martí, especially his political thinkers. And it was heavy to carry from Cuba to Ecuador, all this legacy, but I am proud to have in my library this legacy. But I want to emphasize more in the legacy of José Martí like a writer. When I read the poetry, the poems, the simple poems, as he called, or his several poems, I remember sometimes the echoes of Rabindranath Tagore. I'm also a follower of Tagore, and I read some of his poems, his books, Gora and others that I remember from my youth. And I feel that José Martí has a lot of influence in my own poetry because I write poems, and I recognize his influence because he was talking about simple things. I remember his poem Ismaelillo, or others like Guantanamera, that is a very well-known song that every Latin person has not only sing, but also has danced with Guantanamera, with the poetry that is in this song that was written by Martí. And I think the idea to enjoy the flavor of simple things is such a wonderful thing. It's not easy because some people believe that complicate the words and make them so sophisticated. That's good poetry, and that's not. I strongly believe in the force, in the transmission of feelings that many times Martí made with his poems. I was totally fascinated when I read his poetry, and after years and years, probably this poetry, these poems were in the back of my head because I didn't get back so often to that poems. But when I wrote a poem to my daughter, Manuela of 12 months, when she was 12 months, some of the people that read the poem says, oh my God, you had a lot of influence of Martí. And I didn't think at that time that it was true, but the years goes on, and yes, I go back to the poems, and I feel that it is an influence, and I recognize it as it is an influence of the thoughts and feelings and fight of Martí in every citizen of Latin America, because he was a dreamer. I remember also the one when Martin Luther King says, I have a dream. Well, Martí had a dream for the freedom, for build strong countries in Latin America. He had good friends in Ecuador also at that time, some of the fighters also for the freedom in Ecuador, not talking about the issue because we get the freedom from Spain years ago, before Cuba did, but in terms of talking about liberalism, talking about freedom of commerce, talking about many other issues. He had some good friends in Ecuador. But coming back to the dreamer that I described it, that Martí was a dreamer, I think we must continue his legacy, not only having a dream, but taking the responsibility, because it comes together. Have a dream is one thing, but we have a responsibility is another issue that is very strong. And we still have to fight against a lot of situations, asymmetries that happens in the world, not only in our continent. These last days, I had been fighting for a dream. I was proposed to be the General Secretary of the United Nations, and I was proposed by a group called Forward that has headquarters in London. And they are dreamers, they are young dreamers that are trying to fight to open United Nations for civil society and open it also for women, because during the 76 years that it lasts United Nations, never happened that a woman had been the General Secretary, only men, only men. Then I am a dreamer too, and I'm thinking and fighting and taking the responsibility, because it is nowadays we have other fights, of course, coronavirus. I'm so sorry about what's happening in India these last weeks with all the casualties that happened there. And we have other fights to give peace to every part of the planet. We don't have a world war, but we have different wars in different parts of the world. And we also have climate change, that is probably the biggest fight that we have to do in common, all the citizens of the world, because we are in the same boat and we have to confront it together. It's not possible for one state say, no, we are not participating in this fight. No, climate change doesn't ask if one want to participate or not. We must, and we must do it in a responsible way. Well, all this, I think, is part of the legacy of Martí. His thoughts, his dreams, his way to behave, his activism all around the world, but especially thinking in his island in Cuba. He was born in Havana, and he never forget that. He never forget, because he could be a very successful personality, like happens with Gandhi. When Gandhi was a student and get his degree of law in England, in UK, he could stay there, maybe feeling well and a very successful lawyer. But no, he wanted to go back to his roots. Then I think there are similarities between the big leaders of the world. It's not something casual. It is not something that we only think in a moment. But if you study the personalities of Gandhi, of Tagore, of Martí, of, in our situation, Eloy Alfaro in Ecuador, that I think had some kind of contacts with Martí, they are fighters, but they are dreamers too. And I have to tell that first came the dream. First is the dream. First are the thoughts. First are the writing that you can do. And after it comes the responsibility to put on practice all the dreams and all the rights that you made, probably in a silent place, trying to focus what is the better for the world, what is the better for our world, that could be an island or could be the planet. When I think about the planet Earth is like an island. All the globe is like an island in the middle of the sky, with all the other planets and galaxies and everything. If you use and abuse the resources that you have in this island, call it planet Earth, you are lost. We are lost. It is the same that happens in other islands that is part of the territory of Latin America. The small island that is part of Chile, of the territory of Chile, Pascua. when it is the history and the specialists study about it, when they finish with all the resources, especially the vegetables and the wood that was in this island of Pascua, they starved and died because they were not contact 1,000 square kilometers around it. It was like we are alone in the sky, alone in the universe, because we don't have the possibility to go to other, until now. I don't know what's going to happen in the future with all this expedition to Mars and things like that. But for now, we are alone in the universe and we have to take care of this planet. It's like our island, like Martí takes care of Cuba and fight for his independence. Thank you very much for listening to me, this first thinkings about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalía. As always, the hope that you have for our world stands out every time that I hear you speak. So thank you so much for your words. And I must also say that if you're running for the post, you know that you've got a lot of support from all of us here as well. So I just wanted to add that as well. Our next friend today is Oscar Martínez Cordovéz, who along with Juan Carlos Marcos Sanchez has been of great support to us while we have tried to bring together all of you for this day of remembrance and celebration. He is the ambassador of the Embassy of the Republic of Cuba here in India, and their support has been invaluable in many, many ways, including in helping us procure wonderful messages directly from Cuba by Héctor Hernández Pardo and Eduardo Torres Cuevas, both of whom we will have the pleasure of listening to during the course of this day. Oscar, during his time here in India, has always lent his support to the youth with his thoughts, ideas, and motivations. And it is only fitting that with such a young crowd present listening to all of us here today, that we all hear from him about his thoughts on José Martí and his ideals. Ambassador, may I request you to go next, please.
First of all, thank you for inviting us to this activity to tribute to José Martí. But before I read some words or some lines that I thought it was better to have it written because of my English limitation, I want to transmit especially to the Indian friends, but also to other friends all over the world, also in your country, my solidarity to those people that have suffered this coronavirus and the effect of this disease. And especially here in India today, that we see this cyclone storm that is running from the south to the north, and that brings, of course, also many problems. We wish and we want, in behalf of the embassy, in behalf of my colleagues from Diplomat, to reiterate our most deepest solidarity to our friends. That is the first thing I wanted to say. Second, I want to thank very much Ramit, Singh, for this opportunity and for this idea to organize an art of exchange of ideas and thinkings about José Martí. I think that that gives the possibility that other friends, especially here in India, but also in other parts of the world, they can hear, they can learn the legacy and the thought from one of the most universal Cuban, José Martí. I was during the exposition from the vice president I was thinking, look, I have traveled because of my work in many countries in Latin America. And in Latin America, everybody talks about Martí. Everybody knows Martí. In every capital, you have a statue from Martí. You have school with the name of Martí, like names from Bolivar and from San Martin and others, leaders from that time. But interesting is that I have been also in Africa and in other countries in Asia, and you find a lot of persons that belongs to clubs of persons that talk, write, and teach about Martí. And of course, for the Cubans, that is a great honor and something distinguished. Martí is a personality that he, in his short time that he lived, he made a lot of things. One of the most important things is that I think he managed, or he wrote about many issues, about many topics. And of course, the main topic that he wrote was about Cuba, about the struggle for independence, the independence fighter, but also he wrote many things in this world. I think that the Martian work becomes a very relevant to the present and the future of the new generation, and especially to the people of Latin America, in order to understand the urgency of Latin American unity and the principles that must be rectors in this region. Martí warned the challenges and the threat that our region will face in the 19th century and which still prevail today, shows the validity of his thought. The apostle requited through his ideology and work a conception of struggle and unity that he still has much to contribute. Some same to the issue related to the proposal of creating a Latin American consciousness. Undoubtedly, the figure of Martí has a high significance and influence for the thinking in Latin America, especially in the continental union based on universality, democracy, equality, friendship, responsibility, tolerance, will, ethic, spirituality demonstrated in his prolific work. His writings are a call for joint action for Latin America. It should be noted his phrase, "We talk about the people and not the peoples," because it seems to us that only one is given, from Rio Bravo to Patagonia. That is the feeling of Latin America from Martí. The main objective for which Martí fought were independence, sovereignty, the creation of an important republic with all and for the good of all, as well as the union of all Latin America. Martí also defended the rights of indigenous population and highlighted the peculiarity of Latin American countries, which make them all, however, a common cultural origin different, what our actual leaders say and call the equality in the diversity. Latin America was the central object of his political and intellectual activity, to which he devoted part of his literary intellectual activity and creation. In his work together, there is a liberation from Latin America essence and integrity. He was a propagandist of these ideas and fought with energy and positions that departed from these values. His chronicles of the American International Conference and the Monetary Conference and his article in Our America form a set summarizing his anti-imperialist thinking. The outstanding subject for Latin American peoples continues to be the understanding that American particularities and specificities require analysis and solution to their own. Martí thought this identity beyond geographical closeness or the linguistic community as they did then, and that recognition of Latin America's self-tone was a focal point of his interpretation. This is the lines, the words that I wrote about Martí that I hope that help for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oscar. I think it's just heartening to hear what you as a Cuban think of Martí and all that he stands for. And I think that perspective just adds so much value to this remembrance today. So thank you so much for that. Our next friend could unfortunately not join us live, but has sent in a wonderful video tribute to José Martí. And I must thank him for the effort to translate his views in the form of English subtitles in the video itself, so that it becomes easier for all of us to appreciate his thoughts about the relevance of José Martí to all of us. Héctor Hernández Pardo is the Deputy Director at the José Martí Program Office and a long-standing professor of the political history of Cuba, and has also previously served as the Cuban ambassador to UNESCO. More than that, he has spent numerous years in studying and teaching about José Martí and the ideals that were close to his heart. So if I may request all of you to turn your attention to the video. For those of you who do not understand Spanish, there are English subtitles that you can read as the video plays.
Buenas para todos y para todas. El 19 de mayo de 1895 cayó en combate contra el colonialismo José Martí, apóstol de la independencia de Cuba, hombre de pensamiento universal y líder político revolucionario que legó una inmensa obra, una inmensa sabiduría y patriotismo al pueblo de Cuba. Él partió a la eternidad ese día y en sus ideas se ha educado y se educa el pueblo cubano. En los momentos más difíciles de la historia nacional, el pensamiento martiano, su vida, su obra, han servido de inspiración a lo mejor del pueblo para salir adelante. Su más grande discípulo, Fidel Castro, condujo la más radical y profunda revolución del hemisferio occidental. Pocas figuras en el mundo, en su ideario y en su espíritu, y en sus hermosos sueños, son capaces de reflejar la praxis y el espíritu de un país. José Martí y Cuba es uno de esos casos poco comunes. Él afirmó en el alma nacional el amor a la patria, al ser humano, sin distinción de raza, religión ni género, el valor de la amistad, de la solidaridad, de la justicia, de la libertad, de la independencia y de la unidad, y puso en el centro de su lucha el bienestar y la defensa de la dignidad humana. Yo quiero que la ley primera de nuestra República sea la defensa de la dignidad plena del hombre, proclamó. Martí representa la idea del bien. Jamás se podrá entender a Cuba, su proyecto político-social, su ejecutoria internacional y su lealtad a los principios si no se conoce la enorme importancia e influencia de José Martí en la historia de nuestro país y especialmente en las generaciones que le han sucedido. Martí es Cuba, pero es también América Latina y el Caribe, continente al que amó y defendió. Sus aspiraciones de independencia no se concentraron solo en Cuba. Él también quiso emancipar a nuestra América. Y si se hurga en su rica y extensa obra, se verá también que acompaña hoy los más hermosos movimientos por la justicia social, contra el racismo, por la igualdad de género, contra todos los males del mundo contemporáneo, por la defensa del medio ambiente, por el protagonismo de la juventud, por la educación y la cultura para todos. En fin, estamos ante una figura que nació en una pequeña isla del Caribe, pero que alcanzó una dimensión universal y que merece ser conocido y reconocido por quienes desean un mundo cada vez mejor, de paz, de armonía, de integración y de justicia. Su vocación internacionalista está subrayada a lo largo de su obra. Él decía que patria es humanidad, de manera que este encuentro virtual, organizado para rendir homenaje a esa gran figura que es José Martí, valiosa iniciativa del estimado profesor indio Ramit Singh, a quien saludamos con mucho afecto, y en el que participa un destacado grupo de académicos, sin duda aporta al conocimiento y a la promoción de esa gran figura cuyas ideas constituyen hoy una alternativa en medio del desorden internacional provocado por la codicia de las grandes potencias y el egoísmo de la economía de mercado salvaje, agravado a todo eso por la terrible pandemia que azota a la humanidad. No es casual que precisamente a la sombra de José Martí, el próximo año, entre los días 25 al 28 de enero, se efectúe en La Habana la quinta Conferencia Internacional por el Equilibrio del Mundo, un foro plural, interdisciplinario, que pretende sensibilizar a la opinión pública sobre los principales problemas y los riesgos que tiene la vida humana hoy y apoyar a quienes desde cualquier sector luchan por un mundo mejor. Yo aprovecho la ocasión para exhortar a los que participan en este foro virtual y a los internautas que nos siguen a que estén presentes en ese encuentro mundial que se celebrará en La Habana el próximo año. Muchas gracias.
For those of you who have the ability to visit Havana in January of next year, I'm fairly certain that Hector's invitation would be one that you would find great value in. Hopefully things are better here in India by then as well, and then I'll be able to travel to Havana as well in January of 2022. But those of you who are closer, I would definitely urge you to take up Hector's offer to join. Our next friend is someone who I have interacted with on numerous occasions. And each time, what strikes me the most is his candidness and willingness to have a meaningful dialogue about almost everything that is relevant to our world today. Juan Pablo Ramírez-Miranda, JP, is the head of Social and Human Sciences at the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office here in India, although he is joining us from Paris right now. He's been an active proponent of holistic thinking for the youth using a multidisciplinary approach that brings together all the various social sciences to ultimately help shape the leaders of tomorrow. He is also the individual who made me dig deeper into the life and ideals of José Martí. And in that way, perhaps he is the catalyst that has led to all of us being here today, on this day. So JP, if I may, please call upon you to help take things forward for us.
Thank you so much, Ramit, for your very, very generous introduction. Distinguished colleagues, distinguished Ambassador Excellency, dear participants, dear all, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and a warm welcome to all the participants who have gathered for this virtual remembrance of José Martí on the 126th anniversary of his passing. A special thanks, of course, to 81 Foundation, and particularly to Ramit, who is now a member of the International UNESCO José Martí Prize jury for hosting this event. I wish we were, of course, meeting under better circumstances, but these are truly challenging times for everyone. So my best wishes of good health and to stay safe to everyone in those regions that are particularly affected by the pandemic right now. Despite the current difficulties, this commemoration brings a glimmer of hope in more ways than one. As you may know, José Martí was admired by many for his willpower. His writings gave the nation of Cuba honor, and his perseverance gave Cuba its independence. The legacy of selflessness that he left behind runs deep in the veins of Cubans, even today, as it was shared by the ambassador.
JB, I think your voice is slightly low, so this...
As the virus,
yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. As the virus is overwhelming healthcare systems worldwide, Cuba has shared the most valuable resource right now, doctors, with nearly 40 countries as an act of solidarity that certainly is in line with these values. To share these very same priceless values and lessons from José Martí and the rest of the world, the International UNESCO José Martí Prize was created by UNESCO on the initiative of the government of Cuba in November 1994. The prize was established to raise awareness of equality, solidarity, and human rights, and it rewards outstanding contributions by organizations and individuals to the cause of Latin America and Caribbean unity and integration, based on respect for cultural traditions and humanistic values. South Asia, too, needs the ethos of José Martí. As a region with the largest reservoir of cultural heritage, histories, and a large share of immense diversity of youth, and it also relies in the spirit of liberty, unity, and integration. Unity brings peace, harmony, and prosperity. And in this sense, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which are part of Agenda 2030, echo many of José Martí's invaluable lessons. As many countries grapple with the worst phase of the pandemic, we are also simultaneously witnessing conflicts ravage parts of the world, heightening poverty, plummeting down of countries in various gender equality indexes, and serious threats to the environment. All these challenges call for a more united world. Truly, as the United Nations believes, and as a guiding principle of the 2030 Agenda, no one should be left behind, not in action, nor in response. Each one of us has a responsibility because, as the pandemic has shown us, no one is safe unless we all are. The difficulties we have faced throughout the pandemic were in part the exacerbation of the challenges and existing gaps of peace, sustainable development, and peace that already existed. In this sense, my final message for this short intervention would therefore be one of love and respect, captured so eloquently in José Martí's most celebrated poem, Cultivo una rosa blanca. A white rose, una rosa blanca, perfectly encapsulates the hope for a new beginning, a truly different post-pandemic world where we have the opportunity to right all the wrongs of the past. As we can infer from this truly beautiful and inspiring poem, the path is simple. Treat everyone equally. As this event is hosted in India, it is suitable for me to emphasize that this strongly resonates with the message of Mahatma Gandhi, India's father of the nation, who is tenderly called Bapu. And this message is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. In English, this means the world is one family. I trust our dialogue and reflections strongly resonate today in India and around the world. And I end with the hope that José Martí's message of celebrating the spirit of oneness will help us all navigate not just the difficulties of the pandemic, but also other challenges in life, so we can join hands to build a safer, peaceful, and resilient world for today and for generations to come. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all good health and for you to stay safe. Thank you very much, Ramit. I yield the floor to you.
Thank you so much, JP. As always, I know you managed to take our time to be with us today. So genuinely, thank you for that, because every time that you speak, as I said, you set context for our world today. And I think what you said is so true, that José Martí's ideals, and you spoke of the White Rose, and that's what we began this program with as well, saying that if only we could do that, if only we could see everyone as equal, there is so many of our world problems that exist today that we will be able to take care of. So thank you for that. Our next friend today is Alfred John López, Al, who is a Cuban American who has spent a large part of his life writing numerous pieces on Cuba, and more particularly on José Martí. And he's been recognized to be one of the most unbiased authors on José Martí's life. When I first wrote to him to request him to join us today, the speed and enthusiasm of his response was one that told me then itself that how much José Martí has been a part of his life. And an opportunity to hear him speak to us is one that I've been looking forward to ever since. Al is a professor at Purdue University in the US, where he teaches Latin American studies and comparative literature. As mentioned previously, he's written numerous books which have been celebrated across demographics. So Al, thank you for joining us, and if I may invite you to speak next.
Thank you so much, and it's such an honor to be here with all of you, with President Arteaga, Ambassador Martínez, and all of the distinguished guests with whom I'm sharing this, I suppose, virtual stage. Before I dive into my brief prepared remarks, I want to add my voice to all the others who have expressed at the ongoing pandemic and the very difficult situation in India right now. And it's worth noting, since we are here to talk about Martí, that one of the least celebrated accomplishments of José Martí's life as a child was actually surviving his first 10 years. Because La Habana, colonial La Habana, before obviously before the First Republic and before independence and before the revolution, colonial La Habana of the 19th century was a city in which 1 in 10 inhabitants, disproportionately children, died of diseases such as yellow fever and malaria and cholera. And so as a young José Martí, who we might recall did not have a particularly remarkable upbringing. He was born into a middle to working class Spanish household, and was just another schoolboy in the 1850s, just surviving to the age of 10 in a city that was rampant with disease was actually quite an accomplishment. And he actually had a sibling, his sister Pilar, who died also as a child. It's not clear her exact cause of death, but it was common. It would not have been a surprise for her to have died from yellow fever or malaria. So these are the kinds of worldwide sort of global concerns that are still with us today. But anyway, to my prepared remarks, I'm pleased to have been asked to help commemorate this event, this solemn event, I would add, in the history of Cuba and Latin America, and indeed all of what we have come to know as the Global South. I want to especially thank the 8 Goals, 1 Foundation for this opportunity, and especially to Ramit for his unfailing collegiality and kindness. We've just met very briefly. I feel as though I've known you many years. I don't know why that is, but it's a wonderful thing. And I bring you greetings from Miami, Florida, in the United States, where I sit perhaps 200 miles, maybe, from the land where Martí gave his life for the cause of Cuban independence and freedom from colonialism. The foundation's kind invitation brought me great happiness, because I learned that José Martí has come to have devotees so very far from the land of his birth and death. But it also reminded me of another very old connection. In fact, it is one of the earliest examples of South-South connections between India and Latin America. And I'm talking about the Indian and Argentinian literary transactions that date back to the 19th century, including the first translation into Spanish of Tagore's poetry, in 1913. Some years later, in 1924, when the great poet Tagore visited Buenos Aires and spent several months in Argentina. And of course, Argentina also held elaborate celebrations in 1961 in honor of Tagore's centennial. So these South-South connections between India and Latin America have a long and fruitful history. So here we are, Indians and Latin Americans gathered together to honor another great poet and great thinker on the occasion of his death in battle on the field in his beloved Cuba on this date in 1895. This event for me is another reminder that the history of José Martí's afterlife, as I call it, as a national and international hero is a complicated one. Really, anyone who has written about Martí, especially since the 1930s and especially since the revolution, has written in the shadow of his great myth and his great iconic stature. And so as a scholar, my only real choices have been whether and how to engage the iconography and the mythology. If not to demystify it, then at least to make my peace with it, to make my terms with it, and to try to make sense of this, the huge shadow that this figure has cast over the history of the latter 19th century and into the 20th and now the 21st century. Some of you will know my biography of some years ago in which I attempted to present as accurately as possible Martí's life and work in the context of his own times. My more recent work, a book that I hope will be in the world next year, the working title is The Apostle and His Afterlife. So my current work is focusing on Martí's posthumous legacy and his lasting influence on many, many generations of Cubans on the island and across the world. I have grown especially interested less in his history, in his biography, than in the future efficacy, the future usefulness of reading Martí's works and following his lived example and his lived experience. Although the new book is not going to be a memoir, it does also explore my own life of engagement with Martí. And it might serve for some future readers as a sort of case study of how the scholarly, the personal, and the political become intertwined, sometimes indistinguishably so. Because I too am inescapably a product, not exactly a representative product, but a product of the many ways in which Martí's life and works and iconic image have shaped, in ways both obvious and not so obvious, the lives of untold millions of Cubans on the island and away from the island over the past 126 years. So one reliable measure of Martí's enduring influence on the hearts and minds of people around the world has been the immense volume of writings produced about him since his death in 1895. It would be an absolute fool's errand worthy of Borges, if you know the story, La Biblioteca de Babel, the Library of Babel. It would be an impossible errand to present a bibliographically comprehensive history of writings on Martí. I believe it was 1887 when the French scholar Paul Estrade published a bibliography of Martí-related works, criticisms and so on, that encompassed over 12,000 volumes. I'm sure that by now that number is close to 20,000. So the study of and devotion to Martí as an iconic example of liberation and leadership has endured through every stage of Cuban history, from independence to even up to the post-Obama era. It has encompassed studies in dozens of languages and countries, from the lands where he lived and he died, to across the Atlantic, to France, Germany, the former Soviet Union, Russia, and now happily to the land of Tagore and Gandhi and Nehru. So in the brief time that I have left, I would like to bring to this group's attention a premise of which the living Martí was very, very aware. Namely, that the revolutionary cause with which his name is forever linked was fought at least as much with letters, paper, writing, as with bullets and machetes. As a writer himself, Martí was keenly aware of the crucial role that his public writings and his gestures played in the advancement of the revolutionary cause. So in a January 1892 letter, Martí urges fellow revolutionary Ángel Peláez, and if you forgive my translations into English here, he urges his friend Ángel Peláez to, quote, publish to Cuba by every opening, wars advance upon paths of paper, unquote. This letter to Peláez makes an excellent example of Martí's thoughts on his public image as a living example of transparency, equality, and democratic civilian rule. In it, Martí encourages his fellow revolutionary to engage the arena of public letters in which he had fought his entire life. Quote, we must seize this opportunity to compel the public's attention and use it to advance our revolutionary ideas, unquote. This gesture sums up Martí's entire life's work. Writing was always his weapon, whether it was in combat with enemies or as a persuasive rhetorical tool among his friends. This idea of writing as a weapon, which was very much on his mind as he wrote to Peláez, also led more or less directly to the founding of Patria as the revolution's official newspaper a year later in 1892. But writing as a weapon can only be as effective as the ideas in whose name it is deployed. In the opening sentence of an article called La Crisis y el Partido Revolucionario Cubano, The Crisis and the Cuban Revolutionary Party, which appeared in 1893, Martí declares that, quote, houses raised upon foundations of paper are brought down by any passing wind, but the wind, defeated, beats in vain against the house that was raised like the trees from deep roots, unquote. This public statement would seem to contradict Martí's private assertion that the war moves ahead on paths of paper. But what it truly means is not some postmodern disconnect between language and meaning, but something more simple, that writing is inconstant and unreliable, but ideas have true and enduring power. So it is the ideas of Martí and the example of Martí that is the most important thing to follow here for me. In one of his last essays in 1894, called The Recent Language of Certain Autonomists, Martí again opposes paper to the power of truly revolutionary ideas. Quote, what are such bits of paper worth then against armor such as this? The armor being ideas. Again, Martí publicly affirms the strength of revolutionary ideals over the indeterminacy of mere paper, of writing that lacks the underlying solidity and power of ideas and ideals. And what were those ideas, those ideals for which Martí lived and fought and died? I think all of us here, regardless of our particular political or ideological orientations, might broadly agree on what those were. An unwavering devotion to the right of every nation and every human being to define for themselves the meaning and direction of their lives and their place in the world. It is this dedication to self-determination so long denied the nations and peoples of the colonized global South by long histories of coloniality, and even today in the machinations of the global neoliberal order. To read Martí today is to feel again the power of his ideas, of his prescience, of his continued and indisputable relevance into the 21st century. It has become ever clearer to me in my years of reading and studying Martí that much of what we recognize today as defining the global South, from the intervention of a hegemonic North and the marginalization of Southern nations to the potential and the desire for horizontal South-South solidarities as a force against Northern dominion, was already defining Martí's work 75 years before Bandung. Likewise, Martí's vision of a journal that would embrace a Southern comparative literary studies in 1877, the same year in which a gentleman named Hugo Melzo de Lomnitz famously founded comparative literature as the European discipline that it has until very recently remained, more closely resembles the global comparative project that today has surpassed the European discipline that long ignored it. In both of these examples, we can see Martí's work as constituting a kind of proto-global South literary aesthetic or a political theory or philosophy. Reading Martí alongside his writings on American writers and their works, suggests a kind of alternative history of the Global South. In short, and to end, Martí remains as relevant, as fiercely urgent for us today, here in India and Japan and Miami and Canada and La Habana, as he has ever been. I thank you so much for this homage to Martí, and especially for this brief opportunity to share my own abiding love for Martí as a giant of his time who has cast a long, long shadow over our own. It is truly a shame that he and Tagore never met. Although they would have had to talk in English, I am sure they would have had much to discuss, and they would have found that they held much in common. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Al. As I had envisaged, the depth of your understanding of José Martí and his ideals is wonderful, and hearing you speak was absolutely wonderful as well. What I'm also looking forward to is once your book is out on the afterlife of Martí, that's another name, another title that I need to be reading up on, because I can just imagine in my head, in terms of just these conversations that we've had so far from all of us from all across the world, that it will be no mean feat to try and put together his afterlife and the impact that he's had and will have in the future as well. So looking forward to that. Our next friend is Alice Miquet, an individual who personifies so many of José Martí's ideals, which makes me excited to hear how she has been able to serve her community, especially those who are not as privileged as the others, just as Martí always sought to do. Through her various initiatives, she has gone on to provide more than just tangible results, but also endeared herself in the hearts and minds of those around her. Alice also serves as a jury member on the International UNESCO José Martí Prize for 2022, and is the former president of the Montréal Youth Council, for which she continues to provide her service. Alice, if I may call upon you next to speak to us about these ideals that are so clearly reflective in the work that you do.
Right, thank you very much. Hacer es la mejor manera de decir. To do is the best way to speak. I think this is an interesting sentence to start with, coming from a poet, journalist, teacher, who knew how to use words, but also who experienced that the power of words has its limits and that action may be superior. My name is Alice Miquet. I am a new member of the jury for UNESCO International Prize, José Martí, with my fellow jury members Ramit, Singh, Chimni, who I thank very much for the invitation, and Eduardo Torres. The International UNESCO José Martí Prize acknowledges the work and fights of people who embody the values of José Martí, whom we remember and celebrate today on his death anniversary. I see a lot of participants from various parts of the world, India, obviously, Latin American countries, even European, African, and Asian countries. Thank you very much for joining. As someone who studied history, when I was named on this jury, I had to do my homework and read on this great man, José Martí. What marks me the most of the philosophy and action of José Martí is the relationship that exists between the awakening to democracy, the free will of nation, the fights against discrimination, specifically racial and social discrimination, the importance of native people culture, the inclusion of everyone in the society, and obviously the call to action instead of waiting and hoping for a better future. As I am humbly at the beginning of my career, and I have not been studying José Martí for long years, like our other guests, I will share with you how the same values had and still have an influence on my life, both in my civic engagement and my professional career, that are mostly at city level, which I believe are the reason why I have been named on the José Martí jury, and how small action in the everyday life can lead to a greater society. Oops. So I first started to get involved in the civic society when I was transitioning from university to the real world. And as I studied urban planning and had a background in history, I got involved in a local historical society in my neighborhood. We would give free conferences and guided walk to highlight the heritage of the neighborhood. I know this might seem pretty harmless, but it got me to better understand the fights of this specific neighborhood for the protection of green wild space, for social housing, for the protection of artist studio, for the fight against gentrification, for instance. In short, to the everyday and local action that bring an actual change in the society. And today, 20 years after the fights I'm talking about, all that was fought for has been implemented. I then intensified my civic involvement with the Youth Council of Montreal in the province of Quebec, Canada. I have been a member of the Youth Council for the last 5 years and the president for the last 2 years, and now I'm back to being a simple member. The Youth Council of Montreal was created almost 20 years ago. Our role is to advise the city of Montreal, both politicians and the administration, and we do so by conducting research on various topics that matter to youth or affect youth, and by giving the city of Montreal recommendations on how the city can take steps to improve on these topics. We are 15 volunteer members from different boroughs, from various study or professional backgrounds, and representative of the diversity of Montreal population, as you can see on the picture. Our latest research covers topics such as housing, homelessness, city mobility, racism, Native young people, vacant spaces, and so on. Our two ongoing researches are currently about the use of algorithm-based technology in Montreal, and specifically about the potential of discrimination of this technology. And the second one is about the access to public space at night for young people. As an example, in our paper on systemic discrimination, we propose not less than 41 solutions on a great range of actions, including to implement programs in the city of Montreal to hire racialized and Native young persons, to give them an opportunity, but as well to give an opportunity to the city to be more diverse and representative of its population. Another one was to fund social housing as well as housing for youth with specific needs, to ban the use of predictive policing technologies, and so on. I also would like to highlight a workshop we created and gave a few times to young people from 12 to 30, the City Lab workshop. And I think this workshop really embodies the call to action of José Martí. Here's how it works. So it's an interesting interactive workshop where we submit to the participant an actual issue that they observe at the city level. It could be air pollution, access to culture, local economy, name it. We educate them about how the city functions and what are the city tools and mechanics. And then we bring them to formulate a change they wish to see. And the most important is we show them the great range of tools they have to influence the city in order to see this change happen. This range includes to communicate with their city councillor or mayor, to get involved in a non-for-profit organization or local initiative, to demonstrate in the street, to vote, and even to run for councillor and be elected at the municipal election. So it's a very, very great experience to see young participants being empowered in believing in their own ability to improve the society. And as would say Martí, not only to speak about it, but to do it. If you want to follow us, a few links. Now I'd like to speak a little bit about my actual paid job, which I'm really grateful as it embodies also José Martí values of inclusion. So I work for a non-for-profit organization that develops and builds social and community housing in Montreal. This specific model was born in Quebec, Canada, and emerged from grassroots housing committees that fought for the right to housing back in the 70s. Now, Bâtir Son Quartier, where I work, is 45 years old and employs 50 lucky employees. We mainly build housing co-ops and non-for-profit housing projects, as well as other community non-for-profit spaces, such as daycare, community space, artist studios. We have a beautiful online map that shows you the 450 projects we realized over the year in the area of Montreal, which means more than 14,000 housing units. If you zoom in on the map, you can see all the projects we've done in the different boroughs of Montreal. And as a short example, one of my projects is to recycle this abandoned public bath that has been vacant for the last 30 years in Montreal into 23 housing units for a non-for-profit organization that supports Native women in need in Montreal, where they will be able to have their own apartment for them and their children, and benefit as well from support from the staff of the organization in order to rebuild their lives. The idea is that providing a safe, stable home to someone, this person will be fully able to participate in the society, to have a job, to get educated, to have time to get involved, because they wouldn't have to struggle to pay an indecent rent for their home or to be worried for their health because of living in slums. As a conclusion, I would like to highlight that everyone has a great range of tools, and it could be through volunteering, through political action, through journalism or art, through your job, to participate to build an inclusive society following José Martí's value. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for all the work that you do, Alice, and for sharing that with us. Our next friend is Oscar J. Montero, who has joined us today in spite of it being fairly early in the morning for him. Oscar is a world-renowned author, and amongst his many works also include writings on José Martí. Oscar, I know you've mentioned this, that you have a wonderful story from José Martí's diary, which is reflective of his acceptance of all points of view and an inspiration to all of us to remember his message from his poem, Cultiva una rosa blanca. But those and any other words that you may have for us on this remembrance are something that we would welcome. So if you may.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank, excuse me, Ramit, of course, and all the organizers of this event, and thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor to hear everybody comment on José Martí. I will just take 5 minutes to tell you about something a little bit different, Martí at the barbershop. Today we remember and honor the death of José Martí, recognized as a founder of the Cuban nation. I remember in my kindergarten class in Cuba, how we recited poems, Cultiva una rosa blanca, placed flowers in front of the statue. Of course, that official Martí has been central to Cuba's culture since the early years of the 20th century to this day, as we have seen. But like Walt Whitman, whom Martí so admired, Martí contains multitudes. And I would like to stop briefly on the Martí who wrote the last page of his famous diary on May 17, 1895. As many of you know, Martí's diary is divided into 2 parts. The first part records the preparations for the invasion of Cuba, an almost impossible enterprise organized in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The second part of the diary records the journey from Haiti to Cuba until 2 days before Martí's death. Traditionally, the second part, which is sometimes or often called really the war diary, has been considered the most important part of the diary. It is said to record the transformation of a man into a hero, a lasting icon for the nation he sought to liberate from colonial rule, as we've seen here. But the first part, before the epic arrival in Cuba, contains another Martí, a man with a universal vision and wisdom rooted in what I would call a spiritual ecology, which requires not just devotion and loyalty to one nation, but the wisdom that comes from having a real sense of our place in a cosmic order. And where does that sense come from? Not just from abstractions and deified concepts, but also from the words of real people. The folks that Martí encountered along the way and whose words he records with a passionate reverence. One of those people was a barber who cut Martí's hair in Haiti on March 3rd, 1895. Martí, you go to the barber shop, you talk to the barber. Martí asked the man where he learned Spanish. They're obviously speaking Spanish. Martí was fluent in French, English, but they spoke in Spanish. The man says he learned Spanish in St. Thomas, where he used to be from, he says. Martí encourages the barber to explain what does it mean to have been from a place, since we understand origin as to be permanent. I'm from Cuba. And the barber has this to say: quote what the barber says, Martí records that. I am the son of a Dane, not worth anything. I am the son of an Englishman, not worth anything. I am the son of a Spaniard, worse. For a man of color, para hombre de color, he says, nothing is worth nothing. Nada vale de nada. For the barber, being from a place does not define a national identity. It is a provisional circumstance. It is more important to survive, and if possible, to thrive, than to raise flags that don't put a single coin in his pocket, is what he says. Martí continues to question the man. So you don't want to be Spanish? Martí asks. The barber sums it up this way. I don't want to be Cuban, nor Puerto Rican, nor Spanish. The subtleties of national identity are the province of privileged white men, and the barber is not among them. It is remarkable that in the midst of an epic struggle to liberate his patria from colonialism, Martí records the contradictions expressed by the barber without a word of judgment on his part. He leaves us instead with a lasting portrait of the man, the eternal barber, he calls him, with a straw hat pushed back on his head, perfumed curls on his forehead, and slippers with stars and roses. Martí is headed for an epic battle for nationhood where he will lose his life, as we honor here. Yet he also weaves into this tapestry a powerful portrait of a man who is a human survivor, just like the rest of us. Thanks very much for your time and for having me here.
Thank you so much, Oscar, for that. And I think to remind us of the humanity of Martí at the end of the day, right? And I think it's that story just embodies what all of us need to do in our world today, seeing the amount of friction, unfortunately, that gets created between the various sides that we end up choosing and picking. But to remember the fact that all of us are human, to remember the fact that everyone has a voice and each voice must be heard, even if it may seem contrary to what you're perhaps trying to say, because at the end of the day, everyone is together. We are on our planet together. And that message also, from my perspective, in terms of everything that José Martí has said, is something that transcends his time. And as you've wonderfully put through what you have said right now, I think I did not know of this story. So to know of it then puts things in so much greater perspective, and my respect for him just grows as so much more. So thank you so much, Oscar, for this. Our next friend is Rishika Sharma, who is also another example of how José Martí's ideals have a cross-cultural and intersectional reach. And when they find their way to motivated individuals, they can lead to tremendous good for all of us. Rishika is the national president of the Council of Ethics, a body that has the support of over 200,000 women across the world and over 100 bilateral international councils, with a clear mandate to promote ethical practices in all spheres of one's professional and personal lives. Through my numerous interactions with her, what has always inspired me the most is her ability to never lose focus of the ideals that she holds close to her heart, while at the same time managing to adapt herself to ensure the success of her endeavors. Rishika, if I may now please call upon you to tell us about how you view José Martí's ideals as part of the work that you do.
Thanks a lot, Ramit. I am really glad that the Embassy of Cuba here in India has taken the initiative to celebrate the ideals that José Martí propagated throughout his life. There are so many wonderful things that have been said about his life already, and it's an absolute pleasure to explore and discuss the lessons that we can take from him, which continue to remain valid till this day, even more than a century later. While listening to everyone talk, I couldn't help but draw parallels between his ideas and so much of the work that I'm personally doing right now. However, more than that, for me, it's also the recognition of the intersections between José Martí's ideas and the values which I believe are crucial for making our world a better place for each and every individual. For me, the ideals that I'm most attached to revolve around the importance of taking action which is considerate of all sections of society, without prejudice to any individual on our planet. What we now commonly call an intersectional approach is also what I believe is at the core of what all of you have been speaking about so far. Our world today is full of instances of discrimination and inequity in forms that transcend demographics, physical appearances, language, privilege, all of which find their manifestation in discriminations based on gender, class, race, caste, ethnicity, economic status, disability, and the list honestly is endless. All these, however, merely scratch the surface of the distance that we have created between us human beings. So what I would like to do in the few minutes that I have with all of you is speak about some of the lesser known facts that we tend to ignore, or rather that are hidden from us in order to play down the tragic, rampant and widespread existence of these different kinds of discriminations. So let me talk to you about 3 examples of how these discriminations manifest and how collectives working together can find ways to solve all these different yet interlinked inequalities. And I'll do this by talking to you about gender, education, and income inequality. Thereafter, I would like to spend a few minutes towards the reason why we must always be hopeful that if all of us as a collective get together, we have the power to bring an end to these discriminations, just like what José Martí helped achieve for the people of Cuba. So to start with, let me talk to all of you about the way we see and understand gender today. Women's empowerment is a concept, and I am calling it a concept, that every one of us is familiar with. But who essentially are these women? Are all women the same? Do all women need the same kind of assistance? Do all of them have similar struggles? And are all of them placed similarly across different cultures? For me, the answer to most of these questions would be no. And that's why what I feel is that the major issue with our struggle towards achieving gender equality, for instance, is that we are unable to look at the multiple inequalities that any individual faces within a society. To give you the simplest example, a Black woman would be more at risk of gender discrimination than a white woman because of reasons such as historical contexts of communities and individuals, as well as the other pre-existing forms of discrimination in our societies. And please don't get me wrong, this in no way means that women's empowerment shouldn't be given priority, especially given its cross-cutting nature. What's important is acknowledging the non-linear ways in which discriminations get perpetuated within societies, and thereby moving away from homogenizing individuals or communities. I do believe that a good solution to this is creating collaborative networks of individuals who understand these complexities in order to change the larger narrative around gender equality. One thing that is really inspirational about José Martí's ideas is his focus on the importance of collectives. It is only when all of us come together with a shared goal and a common understanding of inclusivity that we can achieve these highly complex targets. Let me now also shift this conversation to talk a little bit about education and give you another example to explain intersectionality and the potential of collectives better. Since education is also something that José Martí felt very strongly about, I would like to explore how we can incorporate these concepts of non-linearity and social justice, especially when we are talking about education. Taking India's example, in the past 1 year, we have seen a widening economic and digital divide between the students who come from good income households and those who do not have access to even the most basic of necessities. As COVID hit India, most school classes shifted online, leaving a large section of students out of the discussion on education. At present, our education system is dealing with different kinds of issues. So we have students who do not have access to digital resources such as laptops, tablets, or phones. And at the same time, even if we provide these resources to them, there will still be the issue of digital illiteracy that will continue to exist. It is, in my opinion, important to take into consideration those who fall at the margins of margin while taking decisions that will invariably have an impact on them as well. Collectives, and more importantly, individuals within these collectives, need to be sensitized towards these inequalities and realities so that they can use their privilege to make space for those who are always left out. I do believe that if we can achieve this, then we can find not just one, but multiple solutions for each of these different types of discriminations. One solution to the digital divide, for instance, could be a recognition of the importance of community and peer learning. Community learning not only has the potential of bridging this digital divide, but also focuses on the importance that should be given to human-driven learning. Peer learning helps helps make education more fun and thereby has the potential of ensuring the quality of education. But at the same time, it also develops and facilitates socio-emotional learning, which I do believe is essential to create such inclusive collectives. What is also important, I believe, is that all of us start taking responsibility for each other to truly create a world that takes care of everyone and leaves no one behind. Finally, let me also talk to all of you about another form of discrimination that is so common that it often becomes invisible to all of us, that is income inequality. Not so fun fact is that the world's richest 1% have more than twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people across from our world combined. The unequal distribution of income as well as resources is no secret to any of us. We know that the people in power, especially the abusers of powers, the people who have access to such income and resources benefit from our compliance and obedience. The reason why people who are in power remain to be in power is the fact that people who are not in power rarely stand up against those who are. If we collectively demand an equal distribution of wealth and resources while keeping equality at the fore, it will be possible for us to create a new system which does not function on this huge divide between the rich and the poor. A more practical example of how this could partially be achieved would be us as a collective giving up on our convenience. So for instance, if we stopped using e-commerce platforms and instead bought things from our local shops, it would invariably have an impact on the sales of big e-commerce giants, thereby minimizing the risk of wealth accumulation by those at the top. And of course, one individual making this change will not be the solution to the huge issue of unequal distribution of wealth across our world. It will have to be the efforts of collectives who will need to come together to stand up against those in power and collectively refuse to blindly conform to the rules set by them. Finally, and to conclude, what I am trying to put forth is that the kind of world that José Martí envisioned remains to be as relevant today as it was over a century ago. His ideas about liberty, about solidarity, about human rights, all must come together and work in tandem with each other for us to be able to create a world that is inclusive of each and every individual, regardless of their socio-cultural or economic status. And while I do recognize that all this mostly sounds theoretical, there are so many examples across the world of how powerful collectives can be to achieve a common goal. We must take inspiration from these examples as well as from the ideals of José Martí and work together to create a world that works on the principles of inclusivity, intersectionality, and most importantly, solidarity. So yes, that's about it from my side. And I do hope that we can collectively work towards such collaborations and create a more accepting and inclusive world. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Rishika, for reminding us that however difficult things may seem at different points of time with all the examples that you gave us, what is most important is to continue to be hopeful and stay true to the ideals that define us. And it's so heartening to know that these ideals are also the same ideals that we continue to keep listening to over the course of this evening that were close to José Martí's heart as well. So thank you so much for that. Our next friend today, and perhaps the final tribute that we will hear, is from Professor Eduardo Torres Cuevas, the director of the José Martí program and the former director of the José Martí National Library in Cuba. Needless to say, Eduardo Torres Cuevas is one of the foremost authorities on the life and work of José Martí and has dedicated his whole life to promoting the relevance of education in bringing together communities and ending all sorts of discrimination by bridging the educational gap between the privileged and those who are not as privileged, which is also exactly the same as what José Martí also identified as being a clear unifying factor of all of us receiving equal education and equal opportunities in education. The relevance of his work, like that of José Martí, transcends Cuba and is relevant across the world, but more so in other parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. He has sent a video message for all of us to listen to, which, as with Héctor, is in Spanish with English subtitles. If I may request all of you to turn your attention towards the video. Thank you.
Ante todo, quiero agradecer la posibilidad de poder establecer este diálogo con una tierra que también tuvo sus relaciones estrechas con Cuba y que en Cuba siempre sus grandes figuras y su cultura han tenido una presencia importante. Agradezco también el que en una fecha como esta recuerden a nuestro José Martí, al cual los cubanos consideramos el más universal de todos los cubanos. ¿Y por qué el más universal? Bueno, yo creo que lo esencial en los hombres como José Martí es las características de su pensamiento, de su escritura, de la forma en que llena de amor el mundo que hay que crear. Es el hombre que habla de que patria es humanidad. Es decir, la patria no es solo la parte en que se nace, sino que esa parte en que se nace forma parte de una gran patria universal, que es la que une a todos los hombres de la tierra. Patria es humanidad, patria es unión dulcísima y consoladora de amores y esperanzas. Esa es la idea central de Martí. Luchar contra toda discriminación, luchar contra toda tendencia segregacionista, luchar contra todo lo que divide al ser humano. El 19 de mayo, fatalmente, cae en combate, cae en su primer combate con las armas, porque durante toda su vida fue un combatiente por la felicidad del ser humano, fue un combatiente porque todos los hombres fueran considerados iguales y tratados iguales. Ese 19 de mayo, el día antes, Martí le escribe una carta a su amigo mexicano Manuel Mercado, y en la cual deja entrever que la independencia de Cuba no es solo contra la obsoleta y ya poco eficaz estructura del poder colonial europeo, en este caso español, sino que su preocupación es en lo que va a ser el mundo del siglo XX, el nacimiento de otro tipo de imperio con estructuras más modernas y con una eficacia económica mucho mayor. La guerra que van a librar los Estados Unidos contra España en Cuba a partir de 1898 es una guerra en la cual se introducen en medio de la guerra de liberación que está librando Cuba, que es la guerra que Martí llamó necesaria, no porque la guerra sea lo deseado, sino porque la guerra es lo impuesto, es lo que necesariamente había que realizar por el dominio de las fuerzas coloniales. En este sentido, Martí, y creo que es lo trascendente, hay escritos anteriores como el que él hace en 1892 cuando funda el Partido Revolucionario Cubano, partido con unas características muy interesantes, porque es un partido formado por clubes revolucionarios y con una estructura muy abierta para todo aquel que quiera luchar por la independencia. Y en esos trabajos Martí sobre todo resalta varias cosas. Primero, ¿qué cosa quiere lograr con la independencia de Cuba? El equilibrio del mundo, porque Martí ha estudiado detenidamente la formación de los rasgos imperiales de los Estados Unidos. Muchos se sorprenden de que en los escritos de Martí ya hayan definiciones esenciales de los rasgos que va a ser o que van a surgir con el imperio norteamericano. Y Cuba es la más cercana a Estados Unidos, solo a 90 millas, donde está surgiendo ese imperio. Por eso Martí, cuando habla de que es él dice, es un mundo lo que estamos equilibrando con la independencia de Cuba. No son solo 2 islas floridas las que vamos a sacar a la luz y a libertad, refiriéndose a Cuba y a Puerto Rico, sino que el Caribe es el escenario, el primer escenario donde se va a librar la primera fase de expansión de los Estados Unidos. La independencia de Cuba, o es decir, el protectorado norteamericano, vestido de república cubana, va a surgir en 1902. Pero en 1903 surge la República de Panamá y el Canal de Panamá. Y ese canal es el que une la potencialidad del este norteamericano con el Pacífico. Y en esa guerra de Cuba es donde se apoderan de las Filipinas, que es su puerta al Asia. Es decir, lo que Martí está viendo y lo que Martí está diciendo son cosas que incluso son el resultado de su propia vivencia y de la inteligencia extraordinaria con que él, desde su cultura universal, analiza todo el proceso de lo que es el desarrollo de Estados Unidos en ese momento. Es decir, Cuba, la base naval de Guantánamo, Panamá, el canal, el dominio hacia el este y hacia el oeste. Me gustaría siempre señalar que esa guerra que inicia Martí por la plena independencia de Cuba y Puerto Rico como garantía de un equilibrio mundial, esa primera guerra es también, en muchos sentidos, el inicio de ese mundo que no era precisamente el que Martí hubiera querido. Entonces, ¿qué tenemos con Martí? Ante todo, un pensamiento que pudiéramos decir humanista, porque cuando él dice patria es humanidad, humanidad aquí tiene 2 sentidos. Patria como todo lo que representa el ser humano y patria como sentimiento humano. Y en ese sentido, Martí lo que está expresando es la necesidad de que todo hombre encuentre en los demás, sean del origen que sean, vengan de donde vengan, la hermandad necesaria. Que hoy ustedes se reúnan para hablar de nuestro y de vuestro Martí, creo que es un gran momento, creo que es un gran inicio. Y podemos unirlo a esos grandes de la cultura de la India, que también fueron lectura para nosotros, que también fueron ejemplo para nosotros, que también fueron parte de la cultura cubana y sobre todo de la cultura de la transformación del hombre en sí, del espíritu del hombre, de la capacidad del hombre de poder superar los peores y más difíciles momentos. Esa visión introspectiva se encuentra profundamente en los escritos, en los poemas y en la vida ejemplar de José Martí. Ejemplar porque fue un hombre, no un dios. Ejemplar porque fue capaz de ser consecuente pensamiento con la vida. Ejemplar porque cada vez que uno lo lee se convierte en un diálogo entre Martí y el que lo lee. Se convierte en una especie de acercamiento que hermana, que profundiza y que permite llegar a ideas que no son solo las de Martí, sino son las que Martí ayuda a parir. Por eso Martí es una figura universal, es una figura que en sus escritos, como los grandes y extraordinarios hombres de la humanidad, ofrece también el sueño, la esperanza y la búsqueda de un mundo mejor. Muchas gracias.
It's so fitting that we began this day with Rosalía speaking about how our entire world and our entire planet is like one island, is like the island of Cuba. And for Professor Torres Cuevas to also then speak of homeland, and homeland not just merely being where you're from, but homeland being depicted of our entire planet. So from start to finish, I think it just seems to be such an ideal thread that links all of us across all the various countries that we've been here from. And for me personally, I think it's been so fantastic to hear so many different ways in which we've celebrated his life, from conversations about stories, as Oscar, you helped us with, Alfred, Al, with all the history that you gave us of Martí, of what Martí means to you, Ambassador, the personification of that in the youth with Rishika and with Alice. I think it's just been wonderful to have this entire cohort speak so differently, yet in such a unified voice for Martí. So thank you so much, all of you. For Al, Oscar, and Ambassador, for you being here, if I can request you all to give us a minute each. I know we're well past the hour-and-a-half mark that we had originally said that we will keep this to, but Al, Oscar, and then Ambassador, right at the end, if you can give us a minute before we leave.
Of this event, but as I heard the first speaker, Rosalía, she said, she expressed the famous song from Pete Seeger, Guantanamera. And for last year, I received precisely from elementary school in Havana a painting from scholars. And I thought this was the occasion to show it, to share to you, because it's precisely painted in a music played from the 30s, where it should be the Guantanamera music.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oscar, if you've got final words.
Certainly. It strikes me, listening to all of the various comments and all of the many homages from all these different parts of the world. One of Martí's greatest talents, we think of him as a writer, we think of him as a scholar, as a political thinker. You know, one of his really under acknowledged qualities was that he was a master coalition builder. This is not a skill that he had early in life. In fact, those of us who follow Martí's biography know that in his first years in New York of attempting to build a revolutionary movement, he actually ended up alienating many potentially important collaborators. He by the middle of the 1880s, when he was roughly 30 years old, he had fallings out with several of the people with whom he would come to to be inseparable in the revolutionary movement years on. So it was later in life, within those following years, that he sort of became this this master builder of coalitions and this person who was able to create from these very different threads and sometimes very conflicting groups with very divergent interests. He was able to build this, essentially this almost impossible machine, this political and fundraising juggernaut that was able to overthrow a colonial power. And he was able to unite an exile community, exile communities, plural, because they were in Florida, or they were in New York, they were in Jamaica, they were everywhere, that had for many years been limited by backbiting and mutual mistrust. And he accomplished this not by attacking or humiliating his enemies, but by emphasizing the common ground and the sort of the common interests that all the stakeholders would have. It was not very different from the ways in which we talk about the 21st century CEOs in a corporate environment. This is someone whose job it was to bring all of these divergent people to the table and not just make everyone feel included, but to actually make everyone included. It's not a skill to be underestimated, and it's one that enabled. To put it another way, Martí's genius would have come to nothing without this very canny ability to build solidarities and coalitions across divergent groups of people. And so that's what I would end with.
On the one hand, Martí, if you're new to Martí, particularly for the young people who are interested in him, as Alfred would say, and the bibliography is forbidding in a sense. I mean, there's no way that you can undertake it. Many people have tried, and they just add their own thing. But at the same time, I think it was Rosalía Arteaga who said that it's also Martí is very simple. So to go to and accessible, there are translations in many languages and so on. But just to go to the simple verses, is really it's part autobiography, it's visionary, and it's short. So that would be, those two Martís. The other, I just want to make one final point is, it's impossible to talk about Martí without seeing him as the statue. I mean, his massive statue is all over the place. In Cuba, after 1953, it was a law to have the bust of Martí in the school. That was the Martí corner. We had to have that in the school. So grew up is the idea of Martí, this massive statue, but also Martí as a writer, which many of you have commented on. And a writer, after the writer's death, the text is what's left, and it's a plural text. It has many voices. And so to go back to that, and hear some of those voices, and some of the voices is the political, the historical Martí, but also Martí, the poet and the writer. And I think that's a big topic in Martí himself. Is an existential struggle, if that's the phrase, between being this organizer that Alfred was talking about and bringing all these factions together, putting together an invasion of Cuba, which he did, and it failed because of a traitor told on the one that was supposed to leave from the coast of Florida. That, along with a very intimate poet, very personal, very heartfelt, and that is really the whole struggle of his life, So I just want to, make this contrast between not just two Martís, but so many Martís, So try, different ones.
So many Martís and different meanings that all of us take from these so many Martís at the end of the day. So.
Right.
Thank you to everyone who stayed behind right till the end. I know we've gone over our time, but I'm glad that we did, because I think all of this was extremely important, and it's been great for me, frankly, to be listening to these wonderful views. And I think hopefully all of us will agree on the fact that the ideas that he stood for are far greater than any one individual. And relevant for all of us as a collective, just as a part of humanity, just by us being humans. So thank you so much, everyone. This has been absolutely heartwarming and wonderful. And I'm sure that all of us in our own special ways will do what we need to do to help make our world a better place. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.